Marcus Chen adjusted his worn backpack straps as he walked through the gleaming corridors of Nexus Prime Academy, the most prestigious interstellar university in the galaxy. The chrome walls reflected the faces of dozens of alien species hurrying to their next classes, but none of them looked at him. After 6 months at the academy, he had grown accustomed to being invisible. The human was an anomaly here. While Earth had been accepted into the Galactic Federation 50 years ago, humans were still considered a primitive species by most standards. They lacked the psychic abilities of the Zeridians, the technological prowess of the mechanoids, or the natural magic affinity of the Elvari. What humans did have was stubbornness and an unusual capacity for empathy, traits that most advanced species had evolved beyond. Marcus had earned his place at Nexus Prime through pure academic merit, scoring higher on the entrance exams than 90% of applicants. But scores meant little when you were surrounded by beings who could manipulate matter with their thoughts or access quantum databases through neural implants. His professors tolerated him, his classmates ignored him, and the administration seemed perpetually surprised that he was still there. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages and telepathic exchanges that made the air shimmer with psionic energy. Marcus grabbed a tray and loaded it with the standard nutritional paste that sustained most carbon-based life forms. The synthetic proteins were bland but efficient, designed to meet the dietary needs of hundreds of species simultaneously. As he searched for an empty table, a group of Draconis students blocked his path. The dragon-like beings stood nearly 8 feet tall, their scaled hide gleaming under the artificial lights. Their leader, a crimson-scaled female named Zainara, looked down at him with golden eyes that held barely concealed contempt. "Still here, little human?" she asked, her voice carrying the natural harmonic resonance that made Draconis' speech so melodious. "I thought your kind gave up when faced with real challenges." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Still learning, actually. That's why they call it school." The other Draconis students chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. Zainara's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Your species has been in space for barely a century. Some of us have been exploring the stars since before your planet cooled. Perhaps you should find a more appropriate educational institution." "The admissions board seemed to think I belonged here," Marcus replied calmly. "I'll trust their judgment over yours." The tension in the air grew thick as other students turned to watch the confrontation. Zainara's claws extended slightly, a sign of aggression among her people. But before the situation could escalate further, a commotion near the serving area drew everyone's attention. A young Draconis, barely more than a hatchling by his species' standards, had been knocked to the ground by a group of older Kethmori students. The insectoid beings clicked their mandibles in amusement as the dragon struggled to gather his scattered meal. The young Draconis was clearly malnourished, his scales dull and patchy, lacking the lustrous sheen that marked proper health in his species. "Orphan scum," one of the Kethmori chittered. "Your clan's debt means you don't deserve to eat with your betters." Marcus felt something clench in his chest. He had experienced bullying before, but this felt different. There was a cruelty here that went beyond mere social hierarchy. Without thinking, he set down his tray and walked toward the commotion. "Hey," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet cafeteria. "Leave him alone." The Kethmori turned their compound eyes toward him, antennae twitching with amusement. "The pet human speaks," the leader buzzed. "This is not your concern, mammal." Marcus knelt beside the young dragon, who looked up at him with surprised silver eyes. Up close, Marcus could see the signs of severe malnutrition. The dragon's ribs were visible beneath his dark green scales, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks. "What's your name?" Marcus asked gently. The young dragon's voice was barely a whisper. "Dreek, I'm nobody important." "Everyone's important," Marcus said firmly. He stood and faced the Kethmori who had closed ranks around them. "I said leave him alone." The insectoid leader's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. "You protect clanless filth. Your species truly has no understanding of proper order." Marcus felt anger surge through him, hot and bright. Around the galaxy, humans were known for their emotional volatility, and right now he didn't care about maintaining his composure. "Where I come from, we don't let kids go hungry, regardless of their family situation." The Kethmori leader's compound eyes glittered with malice. "Then perhaps you should return to your backward little world." Without warning, the insectoid struck out with one of his razor-sharp limbs. Marcus barely managed to dodge, the claw whistling past his ear. The cafeteria erupted in excited chatter as students formed a circle around the confrontation. But before the Kethmori could strike again, Dreek suddenly stood, placing himself between Marcus and the attackers. Despite his small size and obvious weakness, the young dragon's eyes blazed with newfound determination. "Stop," Dreek said, his voice gaining strength. "He was only trying to help me." The Kethmori leader laughed, a harsh buzzing sound. "The orphan thinks he can protect his human pet. How amusing." But as the insectoid raised his claw for another strike, something unexpected happened. Other students began to step forward. A towering Goliath from the asteroid miners, her rock-like skin scarred from years of hard labor. A delicate sylph whose gossamer wings shimmered with protective magic. Even a few younger Draconis who had been watching from the edges of the crowd. "That's enough," the Goliath rumbled, her voice like shifting stone. 5 against 1 isn't honorable by anyone's standards." The Kethmori found themselves suddenly outnumbered, and their leader's antennae drooped as he realized the situation had shifted against them. With a final angry buzz, he gestured for his followers to retreat. "This isn't over, human," he chittered as they backed away. "Your kind's bleeding heart will be your downfall." As the crowd dispersed, Marcus turned back to Dreek, who was staring at him with something approaching awe. The young dragon was trembling, whether from hunger, fear, or exhaustion, Marcus couldn't tell. "Come on," Marcus said, gathering up the scattered remains of Dreek's meal. "This is ruined, but I've got plenty of food credits. Let's get you something proper to eat." Dreek's silver eyes widened. You would share your food with me, but I have nothing to offer in return." Marcus smiled, remembering his grandmother's words from long ago. "Sometimes helping someone is its own reward. Besides, my mom always said I was too skinny. She'd probably be happy to know I was helping someone else eat." They made their way to the serving area, where Marcus loaded a fresh tray with extra portions of everything he thought might appeal to a carnivorous species. The serving drones, programmed for efficiency rather than discretion, made no comment about the unusual quantity of food. Dreek followed him to a quiet corner table, his movements careful and deliberate, as if he couldn't quite believe this was really happening. As they sat down, Marcus noticed that other students were watching them with curiosity rather than hostility. Word traveled fast in an enclosed environment like Nexus Prime, and apparently his defense of the young dragon had shifted some perceptions. "I don't understand," Dreek said as he tentatively tasted the protein-rich stew Marcus had selected. His eyes closed in pleasure at the first real meal he'd had in days. "Why would you risk conflict with the Kethmori for someone you don't even know?" Marcus thought about the question as he watched Dreek eat with desperate hunger. "On Earth, we have a saying, 'No one fights alone.' I guess that extends to not letting anyone starve alone either." Dreek paused in his eating, studying Marcus with those intelligent silver eyes. "Your species is strange. Most advanced civilizations have moved beyond such emotional responses. They would say it's inefficient, illogical." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But my species also managed to go from barely leaving our home planet to earning a place at the galaxy's most prestigious academy in less than a century. Sometimes being illogical works out pretty well." For the first time since Marcus had met him, Dreek smiled. It was a tentative expression, but genuine. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the old ways when dragons honored bonds of loyalty and protection above clan politics. She said those values would return someday, carried by unexpected allies." Marcus raised his cup of synthetic juice in a mock toast. "To unexpected allies, then." Dreek lifted his own cup, his claws clicking softly against the metal. "To unexpected allies." As they finished their meal, Marcus noticed that Dreek's scales already seemed to have gained some of their luster back. Good nutrition worked quickly on Draconis physiology, he remembered from his xenobiology classes. But more than that, there was something different in the young dragon's posture. He sat straighter, his head held higher, as if the simple act of being treated with kindness had reminded him of his own worth. "I should warn you," Dreek said quietly as they prepared to leave. "Associating with me might cause you problems. My clan lost a territorial dispute 3 years ago. We were cast out, branded as oath breakers. Most dragons consider me and my family to be cursed." Marcus shrugged. "I was already being shunned for being human. Adding dragon friend to my list of social crimes doesn't seem like much of a step down. Dreek's eyes sparkled with something that might have been humor. You have an unusual way of looking at things, Marcus Chen. So I've been told. As they walked toward the exit, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Not just the meal, or even the confrontation with the Kethmari, but something deeper. There had been a moment, when Dreek stood to defend him, when the young dragon's eyes had flashed with an inner fire that seemed to burn brighter than his physical form should have been able to contain. The corridors of Nexus Prime hummed with their usual activity as students hurried to afternoon classes, but Marcus noticed that the quality of attention he was receiving had changed. Instead of the dismissive glances he was used to, students were looking at him with curiosity, even a few nods of approval. Apparently standing up to bullies was respected across species lines. "Where are you staying?" Marcus asked as they reached a junction in the corridor. Dreek's expression darkened slightly. "There's an old maintenance bay in the lower levels. It's not officially inhabited, but security doesn't patrol there often." Marcus felt that familiar clench in his chest again. "You're living in the maintenance levels? That can't be safe or comfortable." "It's better than the alternatives," Dreek said with forced lightness. "At least it's warm, and the ventilation system means there's fresh air." Marcus made a mental note to research Nexus Prime's housing policies. Surely there had to be some kind of assistance for students in Dreek's situation. But even as he thought it, he realized that most galactic institutions operated on the assumption that students came from stable backgrounds with family support. The concept of a refugee student, especially one whose entire clan had been cast out, probably didn't fit into their standard procedures. "What classes are you taking?" Marcus asked, trying to shift to a more positive topic. Dreek's demeanor brightened immediately. "Xenoarchaeology and ancient technologies. I'm particularly interested in pre-Federation civilizations and the technological approaches they developed before psychic enhancement became dominant." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "That's pretty specialized. Are you planning to become a researcher?" "If I can manage to graduate," Dreek said with a wry smile. "My clan was known for our historical scholarship before everything happened. My grandmother was one of the galaxy's leading experts on first civilization artifacts." Marcus felt a spark of genuine excitement. "I'm studying comparative engineering with a focus on problem-solving methodologies. I bet there's a lot of overlap between our fields. Ancient tech and modern engineering principles could make for some interesting research projects." For a moment, Dreek looked genuinely hopeful. "You would be willing to collaborate, even knowing the social complications?" "Social complications seem to be my specialty," Marcus grinned. "Besides, the best discoveries usually come from unexpected combinations of knowledge and perspective." They had reached the transit hub where students caught transport pods to different sections of the station. Dreek hesitated, clearly wanting to continue the conversation, but uncertain about presuming on Marcus's time. "Hey," Marcus said, recognizing the hesitation. "Want to meet tomorrow? I usually study in the North Archives around 14:00 station time. It's quieter there, and they have access to some interesting historical databases." Dreek's silver eyes lit up. "You're certain? I don't want to impose on your study time." "I'm certain. Besides, I have a feeling you know a lot more about galactic history than I do. I could use the help." As Dreek boarded his transport pod, Marcus felt oddly energized. For the first time since arriving at Nexus Prime, he was looking forward to tomorrow. Not just because he'd made what felt like a genuine connection, but because he sensed there was more to Dreek than met the eye. The young dragon carried himself with an innate dignity that spoke of noble heritage, despite his current circumstances. Marcus made his way back to his own modest dormitory room, his mind already spinning with possibilities. Maybe this was how change started, he thought. Not with grand gestures or institutional reforms, but with simple acts of kindness between individuals. One meal, one conversation, one moment of standing up for what was right. He had no way of knowing that his simple act of sharing food with a hungry student would set in motion events that would reshape not just his own future, but the balance of power in the entire galaxy. All he knew was that for the first time in months, he felt like he belonged exactly where he was. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus first shared his meal with Dreek, and their daily study sessions in the North Archives had become the highlight of both their academic experiences. The young dragon had proven to be brilliant, his knowledge of ancient civilizations complementing Marcus's engineering insights in ways that surprised even their professors. Dreek's physical condition had improved dramatically with regular meals. His scales now gleamed with healthy iridescence, and he had gained enough weight to fill out his previously gaunt frame. More importantly, his confidence had grown. He spoke up in classes, contributed to discussions, and carried himself with the natural pride of his species. But it was during their latest research session that everything changed. Marcus was deep in a technical manual about quantum resonance principles when he noticed Dreek had gone completely still, his silver eyes fixed on an ancient scroll displayed on the holographic interface. The young dragon's breathing had become shallow, and his claws gripped the edge of the table so tightly that they left scratches in the metal. "Dreek," Marcus asked softly, "what is it?" Dreek's voice was barely a whisper. "This can't be right. The translation matrix must be malfunctioning." Marcus leaned over to look at the display. The scroll appeared to be written in an archaic form of draconic script, the symbols flowing like frozen fire across the projection. Even with his universal translator active, most of the text remained incomprehensible to him. "What does it say?" Marcus asked. Dreek swallowed hard, his throat working visibly. "It's a genealogical record from the First Draconic Empire. Marcus, this document is over 3,000 years old, from before the great clan wars that scattered my people across the galaxy." Marcus waited patiently as Dreek traced the symbols with trembling claws, his expression growing more incredulous by the moment. "Here," Dreek said, pointing to a particular section. "This bloodline notation, the family crest, it's my clan's symbol, but that's impossible. According to this record, my bloodline is descended from Kurith the Flame-Bearer, one of the founding members of the Draconic High Council." Marcus frowned. "I don't understand the significance. Is that good or bad?" Dreek let out a shaky laugh. "Marcus, Kurith wasn't just any council member. He was the architect of the Treaty of Stars, the document that established peaceful relations between the dragon clans and laid the foundation for our eventual membership in the Galactic Federation. His bloodline was thought to have died out during the Sundering Wars 2 millennia ago." The implications began to dawn on Marcus. "So if this is accurate, then I'm not just some orphan disgrace from a failed clan. I'm the direct descendant of dragon royalty, with a legitimate claim to a seat on the Draconic High Council." Dreek's voice cracked with emotion. "My grandmother always said our family was special, but I thought it was just stories to make me feel better about our exile." Marcus felt excitement building in his chest, but he forced himself to be practical. "We need to verify this. Ancient documents can be forgeries, and even if it's genuine, we'll need additional proof to substantiate any claims." Dreek nodded, his analytical mind reasserting itself despite his emotional turmoil. "You're right. We'll need multiple sources, genetic verification, possibly even archaeological evidence from the old clan strongholds." They spent the next several hours diving deeper into the archive databases, cross-referencing genealogical records, historical accounts, and clan documentation. With each new piece of evidence they uncovered, the picture became clearer. Not only was Dreek's lineage legitimate, but his family's exile had been based on fabricated charges designed to eliminate a potential rival to the current power structure. Marcus was scanning through a collection of trade records when he noticed something else unusual. "Dreek, look at this. These shipping manifests from your clan's territory right before the exile. Someone was moving massive quantities of rare earth minerals out of your family's mining operations." Dreek's eyes blazed with sudden understanding. "The territorial dispute that destroyed my clan wasn't about honor or politics. It was about resources. Someone wanted access to our family's mineral rights and used the exile to steal everything we owned." Marcus felt a familiar surge of anger on his friend's behalf. "Who benefits? Who took control of those mining operations after your clan was banished?" Dreek's claws extended involuntarily as he accessed the current ownership records. "The Kethmori Syndicate, the same group whose students have been harassing me since I arrived at Nexus Prime." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The Kethmari weren't just bullying Dreek because he was clanless. They were specifically targeting him because his very existence threatened the legitimacy of their stolen holdings. "We have to be very careful how we proceed," Marcus said quietly. "If the Kethmori went to the trouble of fabricating charges to destroy your entire clan, They won't hesitate to take direct action against you if they realize what we've discovered." Dreek nodded grimly. "But I can't just ignore this. My family, my entire clan, they're scattered across the galaxy, living in disgrace for crimes they never committed. If I have the means to restore their honor, don't I have an obligation to try?" Marcus studied his friend's face, seeing the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Yes," he said finally, "but we do this smart. We gather irrefutable evidence, build a solid case, and find allies who can help us present it to the right authorities." Over the following days, their research took on a new urgency. They worked in shifts, with one of them always maintaining watch for anyone who might be monitoring their activities. The evidence they uncovered was damning. Not only had Dreek's clan been framed, but the Kethmori syndicate had orchestrated similar schemes against at least 3 other dragon families over the past century. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that they were discovered. Marcus was alone in the archives, Dreek having gone to grab food from the night vendor, when he heard the soft whisper of approaching footsteps. He looked up to see Zainara, the crimson-scaled Draconis student who had confronted him weeks earlier. But her expression was different now, serious rather than contemptuous. "Human," she said softly, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "We need to talk." Marcus tensed, ready to call for security if necessary. "If you're here to cause trouble." "I'm here to help," Zainara interrupted. "My family has been watching your activities with great interest." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Watching our activities?" Zainara moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Did you think your research would go unnoticed? Ancient bloodline verification requests, genealogical cross-references, inquiries into mining rights from 2 centuries ago. My clan monitors such activities as a matter of course." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. "Are you working with the Kethmori?" Zainara's eyes flashed with indignation. "My family despises the Kethmori. They're parasites who feed off the suffering of others. What you and young Dreek have uncovered. It confirms suspicions we've held for decades." She produced a small data crystal from a hidden pocket. "My grandmother sent me to give you this. It contains records from our clan's private archives, documents that detail the Kethmori's pattern of false accusations and territorial theft." Marcus stared at the crystal, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Why would your family help us? You made it clear that you consider humans inferior." Zainara had the grace to look ashamed. "I spoke from ignorance and prejudice. My grandmother reminded me that honor is not determined by species or technological capability, but by one's actions when faced with injustice." She met his eyes directly. "Your defense of Dreek, your willingness to stand against bullies despite your disadvantageous position, it showed true dragon honor. Many of our own kind could learn from your example." Before Marcus could respond, Dreek returned with an armload of food containers. He froze when he saw Zainara, his body tensing for potential conflict. "Peace, young heir," Zainara said formally. "I come bearing gifts from the Crimson Scale clan." Dreek's eyes widened at the formal address. "Heir, you know about." "We know about everything, and we're not the only ones." Zainara gestured toward the archive entrance, where Marcus was shocked to see several other dragon students emerging from the shadows. He recognized some of them from the cafeteria confrontation weeks earlier. A silver-scaled male stepped forward, offering a traditional draconic bow. "House Starfire stands ready to support your claim, Prince Dreek." "Prince," Marcus squeaked. Dreek looked as stunned as Marcus felt. "I don't understand. How did you all know before I did?" An elderly dragon female, her scales a deep bronze color, approached with measured dignity. "Young prince, your grandmother was my dear friend. When your family was exiled, she entrusted certain individuals with the task of watching over you. We have been waiting for the day when you would discover your true heritage." Marcus felt like his head was spinning. So all this time, Dreek had secret protectors. "Not protectors," the bronze dragon corrected. "Witnesses. We could not act while he remained ignorant of his birthright, for the law requires that royal claims be made voluntarily by the claimant. But now that he knows the truth and has chosen to pursue justice for his family, we are free to offer our support." Zainara stepped forward again. "The human's loyalty and courage have already become legend among our people. Songs are being sung in the deep territories about the mammal who defended a dragon prince against impossible odds." Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks. I just shared my lunch and stood up to some bullies. It wasn't that dramatic. The bronze dragon's eyes crinkled with amusement. Young human, you have much to learn about dragon culture. The bond you forged with Prince Dreek is considered sacred among our people. You became his sworn protector before either of you understood the significance of the act. Dreek found his voice at last. What happens now? Even with evidence and witnesses, the Kethmori Syndicate has significant political and economic power. They won't simply accept the restoration of my clan. The silver-scaled dragon spoke up. That is why we must move carefully but decisively. Tomorrow, representatives from 7 major dragon houses will arrive at Nexus Prime. They come under the pretense of attending the Galactic Heritage Symposium, but their real purpose is to witness your formal claim to the throne of the Starfire Dominion. Marcus's jaw dropped. Throne? You mean Dreek isn't just a prince, he's a king. The rightful heir to one of the oldest and most respected dragon kingdoms in the galaxy, Zainara confirmed. His restoration would shift the balance of power significantly. Dreek looked overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was unfolding. I never wanted a throne. I just wanted to clear my family's name and pursue my studies. The bronze dragon placed a gentle claw on his shoulder. Sometimes destiny chooses us, young prince, but you won't face this burden alone. You have allies now, including one whose species has shown remarkable aptitude for impossible situations. All eyes turned to Marcus, who felt a familiar mix of determination and terror. What exactly are you expecting me to do? What you've already been doing, the bronze dragon said with a smile. Stand by your friend, speak the truth regardless of consequences, and remind everyone present that honor transcends politics. Over the next hour, the assembled dragons outlined a plan that was both elegant and risky. The Heritage Symposium would provide the perfect cover for presenting Dreek's evidence to the gathered representatives of the galactic community. The formal presentation would force the Kethmori to respond publicly, under the scrutiny of dozens of different species and political factions. But there were risks. The Kethmori had significant influence within the Federation bureaucracy, and they would not hesitate to use violence if legal and political pressure failed to maintain their position. We'll need to be prepared for anything, Zainara warned. The Kethmori have agents throughout the station, and they're likely already suspicious of our activities. As if summoned by her words, the archive's lighting suddenly dimmed to emergency levels. The distant hum of the station's main power grid flickered and died, plunging the entire section into darkness. Sabotage, the silver dragon hissed. They're trying to destroy the evidence. Marcus felt his training kick in as his eyes adjusted to the dim emergency lighting. The archives have independent backup systems. The data should be safe, but we need to get out of here before security lockdown traps us inside. But as they moved toward the exit, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors. Too many footsteps coming from multiple directions. We're surrounded, Dreek whispered. Marcus's mind raced through their options. The archives were located in one of Nexus Prime's older sections, with limited exits and no direct communication access to the main security network. If the Kethmori had planned this carefully, they could make all of them disappear without leaving any evidence of what had really happened. There's another way, he said suddenly. The old maintenance tunnels that connect to the power distribution hub. If we can reach the main junction, we can restore power and send out an emergency beacon. Zainara's eyes gleamed in the darkness. Lead the way, human. Let's see if your species' reputation for improvisation is deserved. As Marcus led the group of dragons through the narrow maintenance passages, he couldn't help but marvel at the surreal nature of the situation. 3 weeks ago, he had been a lonely human student sharing his lunch with a hungry classmate. Now he was helping to orchestrate a revolution that could reshape galactic politics. The maintenance tunnels were cramped and poorly lit, forcing the larger dragons to move in single file. Marcus navigated by memory and the faint glow of his handheld scanner, leading them deeper into the station's mechanical heart. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew closer. The Kethmori had found their trail and were following them into the tunnel system. But Marcus had one advantage they couldn't have anticipated. His human engineering background meant he understood the station's infrastructure in ways that most other species took for granted. Here, he whispered, stopping at a junction where several major power conduits converged. If we can reroute power through the secondary grid, we can restore lighting to the entire section and trigger the automatic security alerts. Dreek squeezed up beside him in the cramped space. What do you need us to do? Marcus smiled grimly. Just keep them off me for about 2 minutes. I need to access the manual override systems. As the sound of approaching enemies echoed through the tunnels behind them, Marcus began to work on the power junction with steady hands. Around him, dragons took defensive positions, their natural weapons gleaming in the dim light. For the second time in a month, Marcus Chen found himself at the center of a confrontation that would determine not just his own fate, but the future of everyone he cared about. The difference was that this time, he wasn't standing alone against the bullies. This time, he had dragons on his side. The power junction sparked and hummed as Marcus carefully rerouted the energy flow through the secondary grid. Behind him, he could hear the soft scrape of dragon claws against metal as his companions prepared for battle. The pursuing Kethmori were getting closer, their chittering voices echoing through the maintenance tunnels. Almost got it, Marcus muttered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air in the tunnels. The manual override systems were older than he had expected, requiring physical adjustments rather than simple electronic commands. A brilliant flash of light suddenly illuminated the tunnel as Dreek unleashed a controlled burst of flame, warning their pursuers to keep their distance. The young dragon's fire had grown stronger over the past weeks, fed by proper nutrition and renewed confidence. "Hurry, Marcus," Zanara called softly. "I count at least a dozen hostiles, and they're bringing some kind of energy weapon." Marcus made the final connection, and the tunnel system suddenly blazed with light as main power was restored to the entire archive section. Emergency, klaxons began wailing throughout the station, and he could hear the distant sound of security forces mobilizing. "That should do it," he said, wiping his hands on his pants. "Now let's get out of here before this becomes a shooting gallery." But as they moved to retreat deeper into the tunnel system, they found their path blocked. A massive Kethmori enforcer, easily 9 feet tall and bristling with natural armor plating, stood guard at the next junction. Behind him, Marcus could see the glowing eyes of at least 6 more hostiles. "Trapped," the bronze dragon observed with remarkable calm. "It seems they planned this operation quite thoroughly." The lead Kethmori stepped into the light, his compound eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. Marcus recognized him as Thekmer, one of the Syndicate's senior operatives who sometimes visited the academy. "The royal pretender and his human pet," Thekmer buzzed, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked him as a political speaker. "You have caused considerable inconvenience with your meddling." Dreek stepped forward, his scales rippling with barely contained fire. "The only inconvenience here is your family's illegal occupation of stolen territory." Thekmer's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Stolen? My clan took legal possession of abandoned mining rights. If the previous owners were too weak to defend their claims, that is hardly our concern." "Legal possession obtained through falsified evidence and purchased verdicts," Zanara interjected coldly. "We have documentation proving your family's conspiracy." "Documentation that will unfortunately be lost in tonight's tragic maintenance accident," Thekmer replied, "along with the student witnesses who stumbled into the wrong section during a power grid failure." Marcus felt that familiar surge of anger, but this time it was tempered by something else. Over the past weeks, he had learned to appreciate the complexity of galactic politics, the intricate web of alliances and obligations that governed relationships between species. But underneath all the political maneuvering, this situation came down to something much simpler. Bull is hurting people they perceived as weak. "You know what I've learned during my time at Nexus Prime?" Marcus said, stepping forward to stand beside Dreek. "Every species in the galaxy thinks they're superior to every other species. The Zeridians think they're smarter, the Mechanoids think they're more logical, the Elvari think they're more evolved." Thekmer's antennae twitched with irritation. "Your point, mammal." "My point is that you all keep underestimating humans because we're new and we don't have fancy psychic powers or built-in weapons." Marcus smiled grimly. "But we have something else. We have friends." The Kethmori leader's compound eyes narrowed in confusion. "Friends are a weakness. Emotional attachments cloud judgment and create exploitable vulnerabilities." "Maybe," Marcus agreed, but they also create something you clearly don't understand. Before Thekmer could ask what that might be, the tunnel system suddenly filled with the sound of approaching footsteps. But this time, the sounds were coming from multiple directions, and they were accompanied by voices calling out in dozens of different languages. The first to arrive was Professor Vector, the Goliath xenoarchaeology instructor, her massive frame filling the tunnel entrance. Behind her came students from across the species spectrum, many of them carrying improvised weapons or protective equipment. "Marcus Dreek," called a familiar voice, and Marcus was amazed to see Dr. Yillan, his human advisor, squeezing through the crowd of much larger beings. "When the security alerts started going off and you didn't respond to communication attempts, half the academy started looking for you." Thekmer's confidence visibly wavered as more and more students and faculty members poured into the tunnel complex. The Kethmari found themselves suddenly and dramatically outnumbered. "How did they know where to find us?" Dreek whispered. Zainara smiled, holding up a small communication device. "Dragon emergency beacon. I activated it when the power came back on. Every dragon on the station received the signal along with our approximate location." But it wasn't just dragons who had responded. Marcus could see students from dozens of species, including many who had witnessed his defense of Dreek in the cafeteria weeks earlier. Apparently, word of their investigation had spread through the underground network of academy gossip. Professor Vector's voice rumbled through the tunnel like distant thunder. "Operative Thekmer, you and your associates are in violation of academy neutrality protocols. This institution does not permit political violence against registered students." Thekmer's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "This is a legitimate security operation. These individuals have been conducting unauthorized research into classified materials." "The only unauthorized activity I see here is an armed assault on academy students," Dr. Yillan said firmly. "All research conducted in the archives is protected under academic freedom provisions." Marcus watched the standoff with growing amazement. 3 weeks ago, most of these people wouldn't have given him a second glance. Now they were putting themselves at risk to protect him and his friends. But the real surprise came when a new voice echoed through the tunnels, speaking in formal High Draconic. "By what authority do insects threaten the heir to the Starfire Dominion?" The crowd parted to reveal an ancient dragon whose scales gleamed like polished obsidian. Even Marcus, with his limited knowledge of dragon culture, could tell this was someone of immense importance. The air around the elder dragon shimmered with barely contained power. Dreek's breath caught. "Grandfather, but you're supposed to be in exile." "Exile?" the obsidian dragon rumbled, his voice carrying harmonics that made the tunnel walls vibrate. "I am Kyrithdamer, keeper of the flame and guardian of the bloodline. I go where duty calls me." Marcus's eyes widened. This wasn't just any elder dragon. This was Dreek's grandfather, the former leader of the Starfire clan who had been presumed dead. Thekmer's compound eyes betrayed genuine fear for the first time. "Lord Kyrithdamer, you have no authority here. Your clan was legally dissolved." "Legally dissolved based on fabricated charges, as recent evidence has proven," Kyrithdamer interrupted, his ancient eyes fixed on the Kethmori operative with laser intensity. "Evidence that my grandson and his human bond brother have painstakingly uncovered." The tunnel fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Marcus felt dozens of eyes turned toward him, many showing surprise at hearing him referred to as Dreek's bond brother. "Bond brother," Marcus whispered to Dreek. "It's a formal relationship in dragon culture," Dreek whispered back. "Someone who stands with you regardless of personal cost, who shares in your honor and your burdens. It's actually a higher status than most family relationships." Marcus felt a warm glow in his chest, but before he could process the full significance of the honor, Kyrithdamer continued speaking. "The Galactic Heritage Symposium begins in 6 hours. Representatives from 47 worlds are already in attendance, including the Federation Justice Council." His gaze swept over the assembled crowd. "Perhaps they would be interested in seeing the evidence of systematic fraud that has been perpetrated against multiple dragon clans." Thekmer's antennae drooped as he realized his position had become untenable. Surrounded by witnesses, facing formal accusations from a restored dragon lord, and with the academic community rallying around the victims, his only option was retreat. This matter is not finished, he buzzed as his associates began to withdraw. The syndicate has resources you cannot imagine. And we have something you cannot understand, Marcus replied, echoing his earlier words. We have people who care about justice. As the Kethmori retreated, the tunnel erupted in excited conversation. Students and faculty members crowded around Dreek and his grandfather, offering congratulations and support. Marcus found himself swept up in the celebration, accepting handshakes and backslaps from beings who had ignored him for months. Dr. Yellen appeared at his elbow, her face showing a mixture of pride and concern. Marcus, what you've done here is remarkable, but you realize this is just the beginning. Exposing the conspiracy is only the first step. Actually restoring justice and rebuilding the damaged clans will take years of legal and political work. Marcus looked over at Dreek, who was embracing his grandfather with tears streaming down his scaled cheeks. Around them, dragons from multiple clans were pledging their support and offering resources for the restoration effort. I know, Marcus said quietly, but it's important work, and besides, I learned something these past few weeks. What's that? Marcus smiled as he watched Zainara formally introduce herself to Kairathdammer, offering the resources of her clan for the upcoming legal battles. Other students were already organizing committees to research similar cases of fraud throughout the galaxy. Sometimes when you do the right thing, you find out you're not alone after all. Over the following hours, as dawn broke across Nexus Prime's artificial sky, the Heritage Symposium transformed from a routine academic conference into a galactic political event. Dreek's evidence was presented to a packed auditorium, with representatives from major worlds serving as witnesses. The legal proceedings that followed would indeed take years, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The combination of overwhelming evidence, political pressure from multiple species, and the moral authority of Dreek's restoration had created an unstoppable momentum for justice. Marcus stood on the observation deck of Nexus Prime 6 months later, watching as a convoy of ships departed for the restored Starfare territories. Dreek was aboard the lead vessel, beginning his new role as sovereign of one of the galaxy's most influential dragon kingdoms. Regrets? Asked a familiar voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Zainara approaching, her crimson scales gleaming in the artificial sunlight. Over the past months, she had become one of his closest friends, her initial prejudice replaced by genuine respect and affection. About what? Missing out on being a king's advisor? Marcus grinned. I'm a student, not a politician. Besides, Dreek doesn't need me to hold his hand anymore. He's got confidence, allies, and a whole kingdom to rebuild. He offered you a position in his government, Chancellor of Interspecies Relations, with a full staff and unlimited research budget. Marcus shrugged. Tempting, but I've got my own path to follow. Dr. Yellen thinks I might be ready for advanced xenoengineering studies next year. Apparently, solving impossible problems is considered a useful skill. Zainara studied his face carefully. You're not disappointed that your dramatic gesture didn't lead to fame and fortune. My dramatic gesture, Marcus laughed. You mean sharing my lunch with a hungry student? That wasn't dramatic, it was just basic decency. That's what makes it remarkable, Zainara said softly. In a galaxy full of species that have evolved beyond simple compassion, you reminded everyone what we used to value before we became so civilized. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The convoy had disappeared into hyperspace, carrying Dreek toward his new destiny, but Marcus felt no sadness about being left behind. Besides, he said eventually, I have a feeling this is just the beginning. The galaxy is full of students who need someone to share their lunch with. Zainara smiled, her golden eyes sparkling with amusement. The professors are already calling it the Chen Protocol, using basic kindness as a foundation for solving complex political problems. Marcus felt his cheeks redden. That's embarrassing. It's revolutionary, Zainara corrected. And it's spreading. I've heard reports from 17 different worlds about students implementing similar approaches to local conflicts. Marcus considered this as they watched the stars. Perhaps his grandmother had been right when she said that small acts of kindness could change the world. Or in this case, change the galaxy. 3 years later, Marcus graduated from Nexus Prime with the highest honors ever awarded to a human student. His thesis on empathy-based problem-solving in multi-species environments became required reading at diplomatic academies throughout the Federation. But what he was most proud of was the message he received on graduation day from King Dreikthaler of the Starfair Dominion. To my bond brother Marcus, who taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is share your food with someone who's hungry. The dragon clans remember their friends, and your name will be honored in our halls for 1,000 generations. Also, the cafeteria food at the Royal Palace is much better than Academy nutrition paste. You should visit soon. Your friend always, Dreek. Marcus smiled as he read the message, remembering a scared, hungry young dragon and a simple decision to offer half his lunch. Such a small gesture, but it had changed everything. He looked out at the graduating class, a diverse collection of beings from across the galaxy, and wondered which of them might be carrying their own burdens in silence. Which ones needed someone to remind them that they mattered, that they weren't alone. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes helping someone is its own reward. Marcus Chen adjusted his graduation robes and walked toward his future, ready to find out who might need a friend to share their lunch.